Bullies, tremor in the hall, a quiet boy's hidden strike. Ronan Hale moved through Eastlake High School like a quiet contour in a crowded painting, small enough in frame that he seemed to blend with the lockers and the grey tile. Eyes always a shade too observant for ease, hands tucked into the pockets of a hoodie that had seen better seasons. Hair a little long in the back so it could catch the light of the hallway if he happened to glance up at the window and pretend he wasn't counting the breaths of the day. And the strange part was that people who met him soon forgot they'd met him at all, which was exactly how he preferred it, because notice brought attention, and attention brought trouble. Yet there was something in his stillness that suggested a hidden plan, a quiet architecture of strength that did not require shouting for its truth to be known. He had learned years ago that a person could be unseen and still disturb the status quo, could move a crowd without emitting a single loud word, could bear a weight others would collapse beneath and never break, though he never spoke of this to anyone, because secrets like that tended to become weapons, whether you meant them to or not. The school itself wore a familiar, bustling face. Eastlake High perched on a strip of suburban real estate that looked ordinary until the afternoon light hit the glass atrium and cast a prism across the polished floors. The football field beyond the track, a green rumour in spring, the art wing smelling faintly of solvent and ambition, the cafeteria clanging with trays, and the sound of someone shouting about a science project nobody cared about. And it was in spaces like these that Ronan's quiet presence became a kind of weather, heavy enough to notice when it shifted, light enough to float past a rumour, always moving towards something he did not quite name. Something that felt earned and not given. He had already become something at Eastlake, not loud, not seen as a force, but fed up with being read as weak simply because he kept to his own cadence, the way a swimmer resists the current even when the surface looks calm, the way a pianist keeps a hand poised over the keys when the room feels too bright. Ronan's secret strength was not a loud thing, but a pattern learned and kept. A lineage of discipline that had nothing to do with the typical corridor bravado. In a drawer at home lay a battered box of VHS tapes from a long-ago aunt, a peculiar archivist who had taught him to watch movement rather than volume, to recognize rhythm in tension and release in contact, a methodical, almost spiritual approach to combat that valued control, timing, and restraint as much as force. A way of turning energy inward until it found a direction it could stay true to. He moved through the day with that quiet training like a dormant engine that could roar into life within a heartbeat, and he never boasted about it because the real proof was in what he did when provoked, not what he said about it. School was a living survey of every nuance of power, how a hallway could feel like a trap when a glance was misread, how a cafeteria queue could become a stage for humiliation when someone decided the spotlight belonged to them, how the bleachers after a game became a chorus of laughter that could hollow someone's self-worth in seconds. He had learned to listen to the space more than to the mouths around him, and so the days began with him counting the corners of the building as if he could map a way through a maze only he could see. The bullies were not a myth, nor were they a chorus of distant annoyances. They walked the corridors with the same practiced malice that a predator uses to scan for weakness, and they found it in the wrong person on the wrong day. Mason Reed, the apparent leader, stood taller than most and wore arrogance like a tailored jacket, the kind of swagger that hid fear of being overlooked in a world that rewarded noise more than nuance. And his gaze always found the smallest target, the kid who moved with the life of a shadow, the kid whose silence could be misread as fear. Avery Cole followed with a cool smirk that never quite reached his eyes, always a few steps behind Mason's choices, but eager to amplify any misstep into a spectacle. And then there was Jax Dalton, a wiry practical joker who thought the point of school was to rack up spectacle points, to see who flinched first, who would bow to the louder will. They settled into the East Wing's social gravity with ease, trading in microaggressions as if they were currency, finding the smallest opportunity to twist a moment into a public minor crisis. And Ronan chose to observe rather than participate, choosing the route that kept him from the spotlight and his anger from becoming a weapon. The first incident was a slow drip of embarrassment rather than a bucket of salt in a wound. It began with a casual encounter in a hallway crowded with students as the bell loomed, a moment when a group of freshmen collided with him in a spray of paper and spilled water, a small chaos that could have been forgotten. Yet Mason's crew rewarded the moment with a chorus of knowing smirks and a series of whispered comments that traveled faster than a rumor, turning Ronan's quiet step into something fragile in the eyes of those who watched. The trip that wasn't mean-spirited, so much as directed with a purpose. The way a magician tilts a card so the once silent crowd believes what they're told, and the spill of a thermos that rolled across the floor, staining the shoulder of his hoodie with a dull brown smear. The giggle that followed felt like a physical weight, a chorus of other students who watched but did not intervene, the kind of audience that makes humiliation feel legitimate, because it is witnessed and not interrupted. Ronan's breath did not speed. His pulse did not race. He felt the familiar draw inward, the urge to step away and pretend nothing happened, to let the moment pass with as much dignity as one could borrow from a scene designed to erode dignity. And he walked on, calculating the geometry of the route to his next class, his thoughts briefly turning to his aunt's tapes, to the quiet art of surviving a crop of bullies who did not yet understand the power they were toying with. The pattern escalated gradually. A chair tug as he prepared to sit in the library after a hard calculus session. A prank where a cup of water tipped over his book. A slur whispered in the corridor, as though the words could slide into his ears without a sound, the kind of humiliations that felt like a test you could not study for, because you didn't know what the test wanted you to learn. And Ronan learned something important in those days. The stubborn fact that his restraint was not a surrender but a choice to conserve the energy his body would need later when the test would come due in the only way that mattered. A moment when he would decide to act on behalf of someone else, or on behalf of what he believed was true about himself. He thought about the reason the silence of a quiet person could be more dangerous than the shout of a loud one, the way a patient, unspoken storm could do more damage in the end than a single explosive outburst. He did not tell himself that he would never fight back. He told himself that perhaps there was a better time, a moment when the balance would tilt in a way that did not degrade either him or those who bullied him. In the crowded cafeteria, where the aroma of pepperoni pizza and chocolate milk hung in the air like a weather system, Mason's crew staged another scene that drew the eyes of many, making Ronan the unconsenting star of a show he did not want to perform in, as he stood by his lunch tray long enough for the orange juice to slosh dangerously, enough to embarrass him again, and when his chair shifted a little as he stood to steady himself, the room's volume rose. Everyone watching and expecting a pun or a crude remark, but what happened instead was a prick of awareness that did not belong to the bully group alone. A few classmates who had been watching with quiet discomfort found their own courage to glance away from the spectacle, and in that brief, imperfect act of looking elsewhere, Ronan recognized a shift in the air, as if the school itself was learning that cruelty could not be contained within a single private joke without ripples touching more innocent days. The major humbling event that marks the turning point is not recorded in the library's Dewey system, but it is written in the memory of every witness who later would claim to have seen it happen. It occurs on a day when the city's football banners hang outside the gym doors and a pep rally is scheduled to celebrate a team that would soon be forced to reflect on their own image in the glass of the hallway mirrors. In the morning, Avery Cole drops a comment about a boy who wears the wrong shoes to a class. A line that travels through the hall like a light breeze. Not violent on its own, but enough to magnetize the moment into a magnet for worse. And when Ronan passes by a group of younger students who look to him as a quiet guardian of the hall's unwritten rules, he sees Lila Monroe for the first time with a clarity that makes the air around him feel suddenly more real. Lila is not the kind to back away from a camera or a challenge. She moves with a certain unself-conscious grace that makes the room tilt toward her presence, and she has her own quiet rebellion. She photographs the stories of the hall, the overlooked corners where a person's day turns, the way a hallway's light throws a line across someone's face and reveals something true they forget to show. She has a small, almost private circle, another photographer named Milo, a few friends who care about the art more than the social game, and she sits at a table in the cafeteria with a camera around her neck and a sketchbook open, watching the room with a librarian-like precision that makes Ronan feel as though he could breathe in the faint memory of his aunt's tapes. One afternoon, the bullies stage a prank that is meant to be a masterpiece of cruelty, a self-satisfied demonstration of their control that would land in every gossip mill and embed their reputation as the campus's undisputed power brokers. They target Lila directly, not Ronan, perhaps because she bristles with a confidence that is not loud but potent. Perhaps because she dares to do what others won't, to document what they do, and to show the world what the hidden corners of Eastlake High look like when the lights go off. A plan is whispered in whispers that do not belong to the ear, but to the aura between people. A plan to paint Lila's project as a prank, to steal the lens she carries, to demand she delete the photographs she has taken of the art desk and the stairwell where a quiet student had learned to hide. The moment when it happens is brutal in its quietness. The lens is swiped from her neck as she sits near the art display in the atrium. The memory card is taken, the camera body left on a bench with its strap tangled around a metal chair, and the crowd's laughter rises like a tide that seems to have a mind of its own, sweeping away the sense of safety that had previously held the hall still. Lila's face, however, does not crumble. It tightens with a resolve Ronan would not have predicted from a first acquaintance, and a few of her followers, those who had felt the prying eyes of the Bullies' crew on their own necks, watch with a mix of fear and admiration, realizing how easy it would be to be next on the list of someone's cruel fun. The turning point arrives not with a scream, but with a calculated, almost ceremonial act that belongs to the world he has kept private. The decision to act with restraint, but with undeniable precision. The decision to reveal that his strength is a responsibility as much as an instrument. The first sign of change is not a shout, but a posture, a subtle shift in the way he holds his head when he walks past the gym doors after practice, the way his shoulders rise just a fraction, as if to say, "I am still here, even when you pretend I am not." The second is a quiet conversation with Lila when they meet by the art room after school, where she shows him an unfinished photograph of a crowded hallway at dusk, the image capturing a moment of stillness among the bustle. And in that exchange, she offers him a wordless trust that makes his chest feel less hollow and more prepared. A few teachers notice the difference too. Mr. Reed, who teaches history, glimpses Ronan's new stillness during a lecture and nods as if recognizing a pivot in a story he's told 1,000 times, and Mrs. Jensen from the journalism club, who had seen Lila lose a camera and felt the ache that follows such manipulation of trust, looks at Ronan with a look that asks for patience rather than explanation. It's not much, but it is enough to confirm what he suspects. Something in him has changed, not into a flame, but into something that could bear the weight of a real decision. The climactic confrontation comes after a cruel act that surpasses anything that has preceded it, a calculation of pain and humiliation designed to break the spirit of a target and to test the line between courage and recklessness. The bullies corner Lila near the bleachers after a football practice, pestering her with jokes about a photograph she took, pressing her to delete the work she believes is truthful. And when Ronan reaches them, the room itself seems to lean closer, the fluorescent lights buzzing with a tense, low-grade electricity. Mason's eyes flash with that familiar gleam of control, but there is an edge to his glare that betrays unease, now that someone has noticed him. Not as a joke, but as a force that could be measured and perhaps challenged. The bystanders freeze, caught between the thrill of watching a spectacle and the awkward fear of being the subject of one, and a few of them, young and older, exchange glances that say, "We know this is wrong, but we do not know what to do." Then Ronan speaks, not loud, but with a cadence that makes every word sound like a pledge. He speaks of respect earned by quiet effort, of power used to protect rather than to dominate, of a world where strength is a shield and not a weapon, and he steps forward with a measured calm that feels almost ceremonial, as if a small rite is about to take place in the open air of the stadium's night. What follows is not a fight in the sense of a gladiator arena, but a controlled demonstration of skill, time, and restraint, a sequence that uses Ronan's hidden training to diffuse the moment without amplifying harm. He performs a series of movements learned long ago with the discipline of a dancer and the intention of a strategist. A swift, precise redirect of momentum that unbalances an aggressor without striking full force. A calming block that returns the bully's own energy into him. A takedown that does not injure but teaches. A release that ends with Mason on the floor, his pride cracked rather than his body, the other two stepping back with eyes widened in choice between retreat and imitation. The crowd's noise shifts in an instant from revelry to a stunned hush, then to a ripple of surprised murmurs, then to an echo of slow applause that spreads from the bleachers to the edge of the track. And in that moment, Ronan catches Lila's gaze, a brief spark that travels between them and travels further, reaching the small circle of students who had never dared to be brave enough to stand up, to the teacher who finally moves toward the scene with a proper sense of urgency, to the ones who watched and did nothing but feel the weight of their own quiet complicity. The encounter does not end with the long, dragging aftermath of anger and humiliation that many stories rely on. Ronan does not become a bully himself, does not tower above others with a new sense of wronged superiority. Instead, he offers a hand to Mason, who stares up with a mixture of disbelief and stubborn resentment. And in his eyes, Ronan sees the artist's truth. Every bully hides a fear that they themselves are not enough, a fear that their power could be taken away by something beyond their control. And for a moment, the room holds its breath as Mason looks at the offered hand, and then at the crowd that has ceased its laughter, and then at Lila, who stands with her camera lowered to her side, as if she too is learning to trust that someone can fight the fight without becoming the thing they hate. The act of restraint is the finishing blow that matters here, not a blow that crushes, but one that breaks the pattern of fear and demonstrates that courage does not require cruelty. The crowd sees this, the bystanders included, and their minds begin to fragment old scripts they had carried about what it means to stand up to bullies. Some will justify the cruelty because it is easier to call it justice when no one stops to ask whether the justice could be carried out without harm. Others will feel a tremor of guilt for having watched in silence, and a few will feel a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could be brave without turning cold. After the confrontation, the school's dynamic shifts in slow, careful waves, not in a dramatic rewrite, but in a series of quiet recognitions and small acts that accumulate into a lasting change. The bullies lose their place in the unearned pedestal they had built for themselves. Mason's swagger falters in the hallways where he once strode with certainty, his friends following with uncertain steps, while Avery and Jax start to shoulder the weight of the moment's truth, their confident comebacks turning into awkward pauses, their truisms about power losing echo. The teachers who once hesitated now intervene with more than perfunctory reminders. The administration initiates an advisory circle about respect, and some students who had previously ignored the subtext of cruelty begin to question their own inaction, perhaps for the first time truly seeing themselves in the shoes of those who were targeted. For Lila, the incident becomes the bridge between fear and purpose. She photographs the aftermath not as triumph, but as a shared moment of accountability, a record of what happened and what could happen when power is questioned. And in Ronan's quiet courage, she finds a kind of companionship that feels at once dangerous and transformative. A relationship that grows not from romance alone, but from a shared belief that the world can be changed with careful, patient steps rather than loud, reckless gestures. The moral that emerges is not a sermon, but a lived truth. Standing up for oneself does not mean becoming the very thing one despises, and justice does not have to spill blood to be real. Ronan's path remains unglamorous in the eyes of many, but it gains the kind of respect that needs no loud ceremony to be felt. A trust among peers who realize that quiet steadiness can hold more weight than a roar. That restraint can be the most potent act of power when it protects others and preserves integrity. The school's atmosphere shifts as a result, not because the bullies vanish overnight, but because a culture of fear meets the slow, stubborn work of accountability, and those who refuse to participate in the cruelty begin to speak up, to defend, and to stand with those who are different rather than against them. In the weeks that follow, Ronan moves through Eastlake High with a changed sense of authority, not the fearsome kind but the respectful, earned kind that comes from a person who uses strength to shield others and to keep himself from becoming a shadow version of those who had tried to cast him into one. He thinks of the aunt's tapes again, of the lessons about balance and patience, and he understands at last that his power is not a weapon for revenge, but a tool for justice that respects the humanity of every person in the hallways, including Mason, Avery, and Jax, who are wrestling with their own storms, and that the true test of his growth is not how loudly he can declare himself, but how gently he can protect what he believes in while keeping his own humanity intact. Lila's smile, when they walk together after school toward the bus, feels like a quiet promise that this new path, though it began under the shadow of humiliation, could lead to something larger. A collaboration of two stubborn, hopeful people who refuse to turn away from those who need protection. Two hearts who know that the road to real power lies in choosing mercy over mockery, courage over cruelty, and in the stubborn, ordinary act of showing up and standing firm, even when the world around you is tempted to forget what is right. And so the story closes not with a thunderclap of victory, but with a soft, steady light. The light of a future where resilience earns respect, where justice is measured by restraint rather than force, where someone like Ronan Hale can walk through Eastlake High's halls not as a hero who conquers others, but as a witness who changes himself and others by refusing to be the monster he once feared to meet, and where the last page leaves us with a knowing smile shared between two people who discovered that true strength is a quiet act of steadfast care, the kind that endures long after the shout has faded.